The late afternoon sun, a disk of molten gold beginning its slow arc towards the horizon, cast elongated, restless shadows across the impeccably groomed emerald swards of Willow Creek Estates. This secluded haven of suburban perfection, usually a living portrait of undisturbed domesticity, felt distinctly different today. A palpable tightness, an unspoken, simmering disquiet, hung heavy in the humid air. For Sarah, this translated into a constricting knot of pure, visceral anxiety tightening within her chest, a sensation that hampered her own respiration almost as profoundly as her son's chronic malady affected his. Her 8-year-old boy, Liam, lay in a fitful repose in his chamber on the upper floor, a fleeting, temporary armistice in his unceasing, daily battle, the rhythmic, gentle whirring sound emanating from his porch-mounted life support unit, a marvel of sophisticated medical engineering, served as the unvarying auditory backdrop to their existence, an unceasing, audible memento of his tenuous, fragile grip on life itself. Liam's pulmonary organs, tragically compromised and enfeebled since the very day of his premature arrival in the world, depended entirely and absolutely on the intricate respirator for every single precious inhalation and exhalation, a vital, life-sustaining conduit tethering him irrevocably to their dwelling, to his very survival. The Neighborhood Homeowners Association, the infamous HOA, was a familiar, if unwelcome, wellspring of minor, quotidian vexations, protracted disagreements over the acceptable height of one's lawn, the precise, approved pigment of a resident's letterbox, or the officially sanctioned species of ornamental flora permitted in front gardens. These were the typical, low-stakes melodramas that punctuated life in such a controlled suburban sphere. However, within this intricate, tightly woven fabric of petty edicts and officious pronouncements, one particular constituent stood out starkly, a persona of singular, unyielding, and often baffling disagreeableness. Brenda Arnett, Brenda, a female individual who appeared to be hovering somewhere in her late 50s, possessed a perpetually stern, disapproving facial mien, as if she were ceaselessly scrutinizing the entire globe and consistently finding it woefully deficient. This was coupled with an unwavering, almost fanatical conviction in her own intrinsic, unquestionable ascendancy. This potent amalgamation of traits had earned her a less than fond, though widely used, appellation among a growing contingent of inhabitants, Karen, a concise, contemporary term for her well-documented propensity to escalate utterly trivial matters into major, disruptive altercations. She appeared to derive a peculiar, almost perverse gratification from the act of enforcing every minute, often arcane and nonsensical, directive, her judgments and pronouncements invariably delivered with an overbearing air of self-consequence that frequently, and alarmingly, verged on the patently ludicrous earlier that very day. The oppressive, sapping sultriness of the summer afternoon had done little, if anything, to ameliorate Brenda's already sour temperament. She had aggressively intercepted Sarah near the communal male receptacle cluster, a common point of unavoidable resident interaction. Her posture was belligerent, almost confrontational, her tone sharp enough to etch intricate patterns onto crystal. "Your contraption?" Brenda had commenced, her voice dripping with disdain, gesturing vaguely, dismissively, with a curt flick of her wrist towards the gleaming, modern ventilator unit, a portion of which was discernible through the panes of Sarah's front casement window. The polished metallic casing and its quiet, unobtrusive operational drone were, to Sarah, potent emblems of hope, of life sustained. To Brenda, evidently, they represented an intolerable outrage, a personal affront. It's undoubtedly, demonstrably drawing an exorbitant, quite frankly irresponsible, measure of electrical current. This is a shared collective, Sarah, a community. We all need to be far more cognizant and considerate of our communal resource utilization. You understand. Sarah, long accustomed to such uninvited invasions into her family's private struggles, but never entirely inured to their casual cruelty, had drawn a deep, steadying breath. She then patiently, meticulously, and with considerable effort at maintaining her composure, elucidated Liam's delicate, complex medical status. She detailed, for what felt like the 100th time to various insensitive parties, the absolute, non-negotiable medical imperative of the life support unit. She stressed how it was not some frivolous indulgence or mere convenience, but the very essential implement that sustained her young son's vitality, day in and day out. Brenda, however, had merely sniffed, a small, sharp, derisive utterance that spoke volumes. Her eyes, cold and assessing, narrowed with a distinctly calculating glimmer, as if she genuinely suspected Sarah of fabricating an elaborate, intricate charade, a deliberate, artful stratagem designed solely to inflate her personal energy statement at the significant expense of the entire residential area, adding yet another complex stratum to Sarah's already considerable daily trepidations was Mr. Parker, an occupant residing 2 avenues over from their home. Mr. Parker was a gaunt, perpetually agitated fellow, whose primary, almost singular, topic of discourse, and indeed his seeming overriding fixation, was the relentlessly escalating expense of public utilities. He had become notorious within Willow Creek for accosting unsuspecting neighbors at random, often brandishing his latest electricity account statement like a writ of high treason or an unanswerable indictment. Just the previous week, during a fleeting, unavoidable encounter near the communal green space at the edge of the development, Mr. Parker had fixed Sarah with a pointed, unnerving gaze, his voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. These utility surges, Mrs. Miller, they are crippling us, simply crippling us all. Someone, somewhere in this neighborhood, has got to be drawing far more than their equitable portion of energy. It's not tenable, I tell you, not in the long run. If circumstances don't radically alter, and soon, individuals will inevitably be compelled to take more direct initiatives into their own hands. His pronouncements, nebulous yet undeniably menacing, had sent an involuntary shiver down Sarah's spine, appending another potential, undefined peril to her already heavily encumbered psyche. She had attempted to dismiss his words as the incoherent meanderings of a cantankerous, perhaps slightly unhinged, elderly gentleman, but the profound disquietude had lingered, a sour taste in her mouth. Brenda's sharply focused charge that morning, arriving so uncomfortably soon after Parker's generalized, ominous grumbling, made Sarah feel as if the entire community's collective scrutiny was being unfairly, cruelly targeted directly at her family's unavoidable, life-sustaining encumbrance. Parker's chilling words echoed relentlessly in her mind. Take matters into their own hands. What, precisely, could that possibly imply? The very ambiguity was almost worse, more frightening, than a direct, identifiable threat. Recently, there had also been talk of a new electrical engineer, a Mr. Alvarez, who had been contracted by the HOA for some vague grid optimization assessments following numerous complaints, spearheaded, naturally, by Parker and amplified by Brenda, about fluctuating supply and high bills. Sarah had seen Alvarez's van, a nondescript white vehicle with Alvarez Electrical Solutions stenciled on the side, parked near various junction boxes over the past few weeks. She recalled overhearing a snippet of a heated conversation between Parker and Alvarez near the community clubhouse, Parker's voice tight with anger, Alvarez's placating but firm, something about unexpected costs and necessary overhauls. Could Alvarez's work have somehow destabilized the local grid? It was another unsettling variable in an already fraught equation. Now, as the deepening twilight bled into true, encompassing nightfall, painting the vast expanse of the firmament in dramatic hues of bruised amethyst and deep, velvety cerulean, the comforting, familiar radiance of the illuminations inside their domicile flickered erratically. Once, twice, a brief, sputtering struggle, and then, with a sickening finality, extinguished completely, a sudden, profound, and unnervingly weighty quiescence descended upon the house, an unnatural, deafening emptiness, where the customary gentle hum of domestic machinery and the ambient, soothing harmonies of evening existence had resonated only moments before. This oppressive quietude was instantly, terrifyingly, shattered by the frantic, high-pitched, almost hysterical stridulation of Liam's respirator alarm, a sound Sarah recognized with a chilling, visceral intimacy that twisted her insides. Her circulation seemed to slow, then solidify into ice. The electrical provision had faltered before. Of course, brief, storm-induced interruptions, usually swiftly rectified by the utility company, but never, ever in this terrifying manner, never with this ominous, suffocating, and seemingly absolute conclusiveness, this complete and utter termination of all power. She sprinted, her feet barely seeming to touch the stairs, towards Liam's chamber, her cardiac muscle a wild, frantic drum against her ribs, each rapid, painful pulsation echoing the shrill, piercing, desperate lament of the medical alert that sliced brutally through the abrupt, disorienting blackness. Liam, rudely perturbed from his shallow sleep by the sudden cessation of airflow and the alarming, insistent clamor, stirred fretfully in his cot. His small, fragile thorax was already beginning to exhibit the visible strain of oxygen deprivation, his respiration becoming alarmingly shallow, terrifyingly labored, a desperate, losing contention for the very air he needed to survive, a monstrous surge of pure, unadulterated panic, cold and overwhelming, threatened to engulf Sarah, to pull her down into a vortex of helpless despair. But years spent navigating the treacherous, unpredictable currents of Liam's chronic, life-limiting infirmity, the constant, draining watchfulness, the terrifying, high-speed emergency dashes to the sterile confines of the medical facility, had forged deep within her an unyielding core of steely, unwavering, almost preternatural determination. Her beloved spouse, David, was the highly respected director of the city's elite, heavily armed SWAT contingent, a man conditioned by the harsh realities of his dangerous vocation to operate with cool precision under the most extreme, life-threatening duress, to make critical, irrevocable life-or-death determinations in mere instants. His serene, unwavering fortitude was her steadfast mooring, her anchor in the storm, even when he wasn't physically present alongside her. Her digits, suddenly slick with a cold, anxious perspiration, fumbled clumsily for her mobile device, then flew across the touch-sensitive screen with a desperate, almost frantic velocity. David, the current. It's completely gone. Everything's out, Liam. Her vocalization, usually so remarkably composed and steady when discussing complex medical particulars, fractured, a raw edge of terror, betraying the sheer horror constricting her throat. On the other end of the connection, David's voice, instantly calm, meticulously measured, and inherently commanding, cut cleanly through the dense, suffocating haze of her escalating trepidation like a powerful, unwavering pharos in a raging tempest. Stay composed. Sarah, I need you to concentrate, to focus. Where are you precisely? What's the immediate, critical state of affairs? Our dwelling. We're at our dwelling. The ventilator. Its primary alarm is sounding insistently. He's struggling. David, he's truly, terribly struggling to breathe. I'm rerouting the hostage rescue vehicle to your location right now, David declared, his inflection clipped, professional, leaving absolutely no scope for uncertainty or delay. It's fully outfitted with a heavy-duty, high-capacity portable electrical generator. Estimated time of arrival is approximately 10 minutes, perhaps even less. Do not, under any circumstances, leave Liam's proximity for any cause whatsoever. I'm en route myself. Lights and siren. His tone was firm, resolute, a vital conduit of reassurance in the rapidly encroaching pandemonium. While she waited, each agonizing tick of the chronometer on the wall stretching out into what felt like an unbearable, suffocating eon. Sarah endeavored with trembling hands to manually assist Liam's increasingly desperate breathing with the ambu sac they kept readily available for precisely such critical, life-threatening contingencies. Her hands, however, quivered so violently that achieving the necessary rhythmic, effective compressions was incredibly arduous. The insistent, metronomic, and rapidly weakening beeping of the failing internal battery reserve on the life support unit itself was a terrifying, almost unbearable countdown, each diminishing chirp a significant step closer to complete, catastrophic systemic malfunction. It was a stark, horrifying, and unwelcome reverberation of a traumatic period she had striven with all her might to bury deep within the recesses of her recollection. Flashback start. The intensive care unit, overwhelmingly luminous, icily aseptic, and emotionally frigid. Liam, looking so impossibly diminutive and vulnerable in the oversized, sterile infirmary bed, a bewildering, frightening snarl of wires and translucent conduits obscuring much of his pallid, small visage, his tiny chest, barely perceptibly oscillating, monitors shrieking incessantly, a discordant, terrifying cacophony of impending, irreversible catastrophe, a senior physician's solemn, grave voice cutting through the noise. His oxygen saturation levels are plummeting far too rapidly. I fear we might be losing him. Sarah's own raw, choked, heartbroken sob, a sound of utter, abject desolation. The horrifying representation was indelibly seared into her cerebrum, that terrifying, razor-thin precipice between life and death. Flashback end. Battery indicator at 3%, Sarah whispered, her voice raspy and hoarse, her eyes darting frantically to the respirator's rapidly dimming display panel. The very atmosphere in the confined space of the room felt preternaturally dense, suffocatingly oppressive, almost unbreathable. Outside, through the window, a distant, mournful, rising and falling ululation of approaching sirens began to gradually amplify, a tangible promise of desperately needed assistance, but still agonizingly, terrifyingly remote. Nhan Len. She found herself urging the unseen rescuers, the familiar Vietnamese expression for "hurry up," a deeply ingrained linguistic relic from her maternal figure, slipping out unconsciously in her profound agitation. Stay with him, honey. David's voice crackled briefly, reassuringly, over the phone line, likely transmitted mid-transit, his own stress audible beneath the calm. The massive, heavily armored, utilitarian gray chassis of the SWAT hostage rescue vehicle, a formidable piece of mobile equipment, rumbled to an abrupt, jarring, ground-shaking halt directly in front of their suburban residence. Its powerful emergency beacons, a dizzying, disorienting kaleidoscope of flashing crimson and piercing azure, sliced aggressively through the oppressive, enveloping gloom, painting stark, rapidly shifting, almost phantasmagorical silhouettes on the facades of the structures opposite. David, instantly, unmistakably identifiable even in his full, cumbersome tactical attire, leaped with surprising agility from the transport's elevated cabin, a commanding figure of controlled, purposeful exigency. He was followed closely, almost in lockstep, by several other highly trained constables, their every action practiced, swift, economical, and utterly efficient. "Pincon, 3%. Sarah cried out, her voice strained, as David burst through the front door, his presence immediately filling the space. "Non len," echoed one of the burly officers already wrestling with a thick cable, urging his comrades forward with the cumbersome generator unit. Within what subjectively felt like mere fleeting instants, but was in objective reality probably closer to 2 incredibly agonizing, stretched-out minutes. The highly disciplined squad had the portable electrical source roaring impressively to life. Its steady, potent, reassuring hum was, at that moment, the most exquisitely beautiful, hope-filled melody Sarah had ever perceived. The ventilator's piercing, insistent alert abruptly, blessedly ceased as its complex internal mechanisms re-engaged, drawing a stable, reliable current of energy from the newly activated auxiliary supply. Liam's breathing, which had become dangerously, frighteningly shallow only moments before, began perceptibly to steady, his small, fragile chest rising and falling with a more reassuring, life-affirming evenness. Sarah slumped, weak-kneed and trembling, against the sturdy door jamb, a colossal wave of immense, overwhelming alleviation washing over her, so potent and sudden it left her momentarily dizzy and disoriented. Then, with absolutely no warning, a sharp, whip-like crack, a brilliant, alarming shower of incandescent orange sparks erupted violently from the heavy-duty connecting cable, where it linked the generator to the house's designated auxiliary input panel. The lights, which had just flickered on, died again, more critically, more terrifyingly. Liam's life support unit went silent. The alarm screamed anew, louder, more desperate this time. "Main cables compromised. Looks like a direct short or deliberate damage," an officer yelled, his voice tight with alarm, already moving towards the sparking connection. "Secure that primary line. Now find the fault." David's command was like the sharp crack of a whip, galvanizing his team. Liam gasped audibly, a terrible, choking sound, his small face rapidly turning a frightening, dusky shade of gray. Sarah, her own breath catching in her throat, lunged instinctively for the ambu bag once more, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, for a terrifying, chaotic half-minute that stretched into an eternity. Frantic activity reigned as 2 highly skilled officers, working with desperate, focused precision in the narrow, stark beam of powerful tactical flashlights, expertly bypassed the visibly damaged, smoking section of the thick, insulated conduit, their movements urgent, economical, born of countless hours of training. The generator's robust growl changed pitch momentarily, faltered, then settled back into its reassuring rhythm. The respirator whirred back to vibrant life, its display glowing steadily. Liam's dangerously dusky color slowly, blessedly, began to recede, replaced by a more natural, albeit still pale, hue. This time, Sarah didn't just feel simple relief. Beneath the profound, bone-deep exhaustion that was beginning to claim her, a cold, hard, dangerous wrath was beginning to ignite, a perilous, volcanic heat accumulating in the very pit of her stomach. This was no accident. David, his normally composed countenance now a grim, unreadable mask in the intermittent, strobing flashes of the emergency beacons, turned purposefully to one of his lead technical operatives. "Body cams are all active, and recording unmanned aerial surveillance vehicle is airborne and has a clear field of view." "Yes, Chief," All systems are fully functional and recording data. The operative confirmed crisply, his attention fixed on a small, ruggedized monitor displaying a bird's-eye view of the neighborhood. A small, incredibly sophisticated thermal imaging drone, having been launched moments earlier, had lifted almost silently from its deployment point, ascending rapidly and stealthily into the dark, star-dusted nocturnal sky. Its advanced gimbal-mounted optical device, equipped with highly sensitive thermal detectors, immediately began its programmed survey of the neighborhood's complex electrical framework, focusing with particular intensity on the main circuit interrupter enclosures that controlled energy distribution to the various designated sectors of Willow Creek Estates. While the uniformed constables and technical specialists worked with practiced, almost balletic exactitude to secure a completely stable, direct current line from the generator directly to their dwelling's internal system, effectively bypassing the now clearly compromised public utility grid. David meticulously reviewed the incoming aerial surveillance data stream on a ruggedized, military-grade computing tablet. The thermal representation painted on the screen was starkly, chillingly revelatory. It clearly, unequivocally showed a distinct human-shaped figure, easily identifiable by its unique heat profile against the significantly cooler nocturnal backdrop, actively meddling with the main breaker panel specifically designated for their particular segment of the street. This nefarious action had occurred, the timestamp confirmed, just crucial minutes before the energy supply to their home had inexplicably, catastrophically ceased. The telltale thermal intensity around one specific heavy-duty interrupter switch, the very one that supplied electricity directly to their house, was significantly, demonstrably higher than that of all the others in the panel. A clear, unambiguous indication of recent, forceful, and quite possibly repeated handling. The general contours of the figure, its characteristic manner of walking, and even its somewhat distinctive coiffure, as clearly highlighted by the stark thermal differentiation, were all unmistakably, damningly, those of none other than Brenda Arnett. Further, incredibly meticulous scrutiny of the drone's recorded flight trajectory and its archived, time-coded recordings showed Brenda moving with a strange, almost methodical deliberation between several other main breaker panels located in adjacent, separately fed sectors of the residential area. At each of these additional sites, she had briefly, almost experimentally, it seemed, switched them off and then, only moments later, switched them back on again. The malevolent, twisted purpose was sickeningly, horrifyingly evident to create a more widespread, albeit temporary, electrical outage, a perverse, vindictive notion of equal darkness for all, thereby ensuring, in her warped view, that no single household was unfairly plunged into shadow alone, except, it now seemed with chilling clarity, for theirs, which she had left definitively, maliciously, deactivated. But the damaged generator cable, that pointed to something more, something Brenda alone was unlikely to have orchestrated. David's strong jaw clenched until the muscles stood out in sharp relief, his knuckles showing white where he gripped the edges of the electronic slate with considerable force. This wasn't merely a simple, if widespread, energy interruption, not some unfortunate accident or an unexpected systemic breakdown. This was a deliberate, meticulously calculated, and profoundly malicious act of reckless endangerment, possibly something even worse. He approached Sarah, who was now seated, exhausted but vigilant, beside Liam's cot, her hand gently stroking her son's fine hair, her face pallid but set in a look of fierce, maternal resolve. His eyes, when they finally met hers across the dimly lit room, were filled with a volatile, dangerous admixture of profound, heartfelt solicitude for his endangered family and a barely suppressed, white-hot, simmering indignation. "Sarah," he said, his voice low, controlled, and gravelly. The drone surveillance material. It's utterly conclusive. Damning. It was Brenda. At our breaker, at least. She deliberately, systematically cut the current to multiple homes in the vicinity, and she specifically, unequivocally, targeted our supply. Sarah stared at him, her overtaxed intellect struggling desperately to process the full, monstrous enormity of his pronouncement. Sheer, stunned disbelief warred violently with a horrifying, chilling wave of dawning, sickening comprehension. Brenda's sharply pointed, accusatory remarks from earlier that very day, her insufferable, smug self-righteousness, her almost gleeful, condemnatory declarations about excessive resource utilization, now suddenly assumed a deeply sinister, actively malevolent, and terrifying connotation. But why? She whispered, the simple, desperate query hanging heavy, unanswered, in the tense atmosphere of the room, laden with utter incomprehension and a burgeoning, soul-deep horror. Why on earth would she, or anyone, undertake something so utterly monstrous, so unforgivably cruel? The initial recordings strongly suggest she wanted everyone in the immediate vicinity to experience the outage simultaneously, perhaps to make some kind of perverse, twisted statement about shared hardship or communal responsibility. David explicated carefully, his voice tight and strained with the effort of maintaining his professional control over his surging fury, but specifically, deliberately targeting our main household interrupter, knowing full well about Liam's ventilator, about his absolute, non-negotiable reliance on it for every breath. His voice trailed off into a tense silence, the full, horrifying, almost unimaginable ramifications of such an act too dreadful, too sickening, to articulate fully. The thought that someone, a neighbor, could, with cold premeditation, so casually endanger her precious child's fragile life out of petty spite, a warped sense of justice, or something even darker, was almost too much for Sarah's already frayed composure to bear. The highly trained SWAT operatives, having now thoroughly secured the energy provision to Liam's essential medical apparatus by establishing a redundant connection and confirming the generator's unwavering stability once again, now moved with a grim, silent purpose towards Brenda Arnett's neatly kept domicile, located just a few structures further down the quiet, tree-lined avenue. David, with Sarah, now infused with a cold, righteous, and determined anger that superseded her exhaustion, walking steadily, resolutely by his side, followed them, a silent, grim procession under the watchful stars. Brenda Arnett stood defiantly on her meticulously maintained, brightly lit veranda, her arms crossed tightly, almost aggressively, over her chest. A look of indignant, almost smugly self-righteous contentment was deeply etched onto her sharp features as she observed the official police presence converging on her property. It was as if she were dispassionately surveying a complex scenario that she herself had skillfully orchestrated and was now finding it deeply, personally gratifying. "What in heaven's name is all this unseemly pandemonium?" she demanded loudly, her voice laced with a carefully practiced, theatrical vexation, feigning utter, innocent nescience. All this fuss and unwarranted disruption in the dead middle of the night. Some of us in this neighborhood are attempting to obtain a decent night's slumber. You know, Brenda's inner monologue. Start. It simply wasn't equitable, not by any stretch of the imagination. The endless, terrifying invoices, veritable mountains of them, they had seemed, after her own dear mama got so terribly sick, they'd nearly lost the old family homestead, the place where she'd grown up. No one, absolutely no one, had assisted them back then. No special, expensive contrivances magically paid for by the collective generosity of the community. This Miller female, With her perpetually ailing offspring, it was a constant, infuriating, galling memento of that injustice. Why should they receive seemingly endless, special provisions when other decent, hard-working folks endured such terrible hardship and ultimately forfeited nearly everything? The astronomical, ongoing cost of that infernal, humming machine. Day in, day out. A little bit of shared, equitable privation. That's all she truly wanted to demonstrate to them all, for their own good. Brenda's inner monologue. End. David stepped deliberately forward, his considerable physical stature and the inherent, undeniable authority conveyed by his uniform and professional demeanor making him an instantly imposing, almost intimidating figure in the harsh glare of the porch light. "Brenda Arnett," he stated, his voice utterly devoid of any warmth or conciliation, as cold and unwavering as polished, unforgiving steel. "You are under official apprehension." Her eyes widened in a display of exaggerated, theatrical disbelief, her jaw dropping slightly in feigned shock. "Apprehension? You intend to apprehend me for what? Pray tell. I'd very much like to know. For the attempted culpable homicide of a disabled juvenile." David stated flatly, his voice cutting cleanly, sharply through her indignant bluster. "And for the deliberate, malicious sabotage of critical community electrical infrastructure." He held up the ruggedized tablet, angling the illuminated screen so that the damning, glowing thermal image of her captured at the breaker panel was starkly, unmistakably visible in the surrounding darkness. This unmanned aerial vehicle's video recording, meticulously time-stamped and utterly irrefutable, clearly and graphically, shows you actively tampering with the main electrical interrupter panel for this street, and specifically, methodically, targeting the primary energy provision to the residence of my son, Liam Miller, who, as you are exceptionally well aware, is critically dependent on life-sustaining medical equipment for his very survival. Bating, Brenda's face, which only moments before had been a carefully constructed mask of affronted, righteous dignity, rapidly, visibly blanched to a sickly, mottled, unhealthy white. The carefully cultivated smugness evaporated completely, replaced by a sudden, undeniable flicker of genuine, animalistic alarm. That's utterly ludicrous, preposterous, a complete fabrication," she stammered, her former bravado crumbling rapidly, visibly, into dust. I was merely attempting to ensure fair, equitable electrical utilization for all residents. Even Parker said so. He completely agreed it wasn't fair. The amount they were using, he said something had to be done." David's head snapped up sharply at the unexpected, voluntary mention of Parker's name. A new, cold suspicion began to form. "Parker, what, precisely, does Mr. Parker have to do with any of this? Brenda?" Brenda's eyes darted nervously from side to side, like a trapped animal seeking an escape route. He knows about it. He saw me. He saw me by the other electrical panels earlier this evening. He told me that if I didn't make absolutely sure that everyone in the neighborhood fully understood the problem, especially the Millers with their constant, excessive energy drain, he'd show everyone what I'd been doing. He had his mobile phone out. I saw him. He was filming me from his upstairs window. He was going to expose me. A profound, cold dread settled heavily over David. This was more complicated. He gestured curtly to two of his nearby officers. "Secure Ms. Arnett. Read her rights. The rest of you, come with me. It appears we need to have a serious conversation with a Mr. Parker." He glanced back towards the drone operator, his voice hardening. "Focus all available surveillance on Parker's property immediately. I want to know about any unusual heat signatures, any unexpected activity, right now. and meticulously review all previously recorded footage from this evening for any visual confirmation of him observing Arnett's earlier activities or interacting with her. The subsequent scene that unfolded at Mr. Parker's well-kept residence a few minutes later was considerably less overtly dramatic than the confrontation with Brenda, but in its own quiet way, far more chilling. Parker initially, and quite unconvincingly, feigned complete ignorance, then blustered indignantly when directly confronted with Brenda's damning accusation. But the drone footage, now re-examined with this new, sharp focus, was utterly damning. It clearly showed a faint but definite heat signature in Parker's darkened upstairs window, perfectly consistent with someone covertly observing Brenda's movements at the various breaker boxes. More damningly still, a quick, legally authorized, and exigent check of recently deleted digital files on his home computer system, a data recovery operation initiated due to the pressing, exigent circumstances related to a potential ongoing conspiracy in a life-threatening felony crime, yielded several short, incriminating video clips. These clips unmistakably showed Brenda nervously, furtively flipping switches at other community breaker boxes throughout the neighborhood, clearly filmed from Parker's elevated vantage point. The embedded metadata within the digital files unequivocally confirmed they had been recorded earlier that same evening. Parker had been collecting leverage. "It seems, Mr. Parker," David said, his voice now like shards of glacial ice, "that you weren't just another disgruntled, complaining neighbor after all. You actively coerced Ms. Arnett. You systematically exploited her misguided, festering sense of fairness and your explicit threats of public exposure to deliberately direct her dangerous actions specifically towards my family, towards my vulnerable son. It appears you were the one who maliciously escalated this entire situation from what might have been petty vandalism or misguided protest into attempted manslaughter." Parker, his face now a ghastly, ashen gray, his earlier bluster completely gone, offered no further resistance as he, too, was formally taken into custody. It was becoming horrifyingly clear that he had been the cold, calculating puppet master, the one who had carefully and cruelly masterminded the specific, life-threatening targeting of Liam's essential lifeline, cynically using the resentful, easily manipulated Brenda as his desperate, unwitting, and ultimately disposable tool. The damaged generator cable, however, still felt like a missing piece, a level of technical sabotage beyond Brenda's likely capability or Parker's direct involvement. The legal proceedings that followed in the subsequent weeks were intricate and, at times, highly contentious. Brenda Arnett, facing a battery of extremely serious criminal charges, ultimately, and on the advice of her counsel, chose to cooperate fully with the prosecution. Her defense meticulously painted her as a vulnerable, easily influenced pawn, albeit a culpably willing one in her generalized, ill-conceived desire for equal suffering within the community. Parker, the quiet, insidious instigator, the one who had callously pushed Brenda to the brink and then specifically, maliciously directed her to endanger Liam's life, faced the full, unmitigated brunt of the state's legal power. The trial took a dramatic turn when the prosecution introduced new, unexpected evidence, a grainy, covertly recorded video. It had been found on a hidden partition on a seized external hard drive belonging to Parker. The video showed Parker in a clandestine meeting with none other than Hector Alvarez, the electrical engineer. In the footage, Parker was clearly seen handing Alvarez a thick envelope of cash. Their hushed, but audible, conversation revolved around Alvarez making specific, untraceable modifications to the auxiliary power junction at the Miller residence, designed to cause a cascade failure if an external generator was connected. Reroutes. Alvarez, under questioning and facing his own set of charges, confessed to the bribery and the sabotage, explaining he'd been in dire financial straits. Parker hadn't just wanted the power out. He'd wanted to ensure any attempt to restore it would also fail. A truly diabolical level of premeditation. This was the final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. The judge, a seasoned jurist, visibly incensed by Parker's manipulative, sociopathic cruelty, Brenda's reckless, dangerous complicity, and Alvarez's corrupt betrayal of his professional ethics, issued stringent, lengthy custodial sentences for all three individuals, along with permanent, far-reaching restraining orders, preventing them from ever again approaching any member of the Miller family or any other resident of Willow Creek Estates known to have medically vulnerable individuals in their household. A fragile, tentative sense of tranquility slowly, almost imperceptibly, began to return to the shaken community of Willow Creek Estates. That very evening, following the trial's conclusion, a quiet, solemn procession of neighbors, their faces softly illuminated by the warm, flickering glow of handheld candles, approached Sarah and David's home. They carefully, reverently placed their small, flickering lights on the porch steps, forming a silent, luminous vigil of heartfelt support, a poignant beacon of shared humanity shining brightly in the lingering, psychological darkness of the protracted, terrifying ordeal. Later that night, standing quietly by Liam's bedside, watching his peaceful, even, machine-assisted breaths fill the quiet room, Sarah reflected deeply. It's utterly terrifying how easily bitterness and resentment can be manipulated by those with dark intentions. She murmured softly to David, who stood beside her, his arm a comforting weight around her shoulders. How readily some individuals will sacrifice another's precious well-being, even a child's life, on the unholy altar of their own warped, selfish grievances. The vivid, painful memory of that terrifying, chaotic night, the chilling, multi-layered deceit, and the cold, deliberate, malicious intent of three of their erstwhile neighbors would undoubtedly forever linger in their minds, a profound, indelible scar on their family's peace and their sense of security. But so too, she knew, would the comforting, inspiring image of the countless candles, a powerful, enduring testament to the quiet, resilient strength of human decency and compassion when it finally, courageously, asserts itself against the encroaching shadows. True community is not merely found in shared addresses, but painstakingly forged in the crucibles of shared vulnerability, and perpetually defended by unwavering vigilance against the insidious shadows that can lurk within any heart.